Welcome to the Truck Crash Litigators Podcast, hosted by the Trucking Injury Law Group and part of the Lawyer Minds ecosystem. The Truck Crash Litigators Podcast is dedicated to discussing the latest legal trends in the trucking industry. We'll discuss everything from new case laws and regulations to breaking down specific cases. Our goal is to not only share our knowledge and insights with other trial lawyers, but also to inform and educate the general public. Here are your hosts, Kevin Coluccio, Lincoln Seiler, and Matthew Sharp.
Hello, everybody. This is Kevin Coluccio in Seattle, Washington, with the Trucking Injury Law Group. My primary office is in Seattle, Washington, although I practice throughout the state of Washington and Oregon. I've had cases in Utah, in Nevada, and California. My area of specialty is truck accidents. I'm proud to say that I'm one of just a handful of lawyers in the country that is board certified by the National Board of Trial Advocacy, a rather complicated process which requires that you have a great deal of experience, knowledge, and then pass the test. This podcast is dedicated to the victims of truck injuries and their families, and we're proud to have put this group together in order to provide people with the quality representation in these types of cases that they deserve and is required. I'll pass it on to my colleague Lincoln Seiler to talk a little bit about himself.
Well, hey, everybody. My name is Lincoln Seiler, and I am an attorney with Friedman Rubin, also based out of Seattle. But if you're an attorney, a plaintiff's attorney, most of you guys have heard of us. We try cases all across the country, and a lot of it focuses on product liability cases, mass torts. My particular focus is on trucking law, product liability, and that's about it for me, Matt.
Well, guys, I'm here in Reno, Nevada. I'm Matt Sharp. I'm a Nevada trial lawyer. Try cases all throughout Nevada. My kind of specialty's been in insurance, bad faith, coverage issues, product liability, and trucking law.
Well, don't forget you're the two-time reigning trial lawyer of the year in Nevada, which sounds like a brag, but really it's not. It's quite an honor, Matt, and congratulations on that recent honor that was celebrated this past summer.
Thank you very much. There's only one other two-time trial lawyer of the year in the state of Nevada, so I'm very proud of having been recognized by my peers a second time. I'm also the only two-time president of our Nevada Justice Association, our statewide trial lawyer association.
Was that a default because nobody wanted to do it, or were you, did they seek you out because of a great job you did on the first term?
It's a long story, but yeah, it was basically a moment in time where we had issues that were coming up with regard to tort issues in front of the legislature, and they asked me to get involved one more year because I was somebody that the legislators trusted.
Well, congrats on that as well. And this is our first podcast, our group's first podcast, and these Truck Crash Litigators podcasts are dedicated to discussing the latest legal trends in the trucking industry and with trucking accidents. Over the course of the next several podcasts, we'll discuss everything from new case law to regulations to breaking down specific cases that we have handled in the past and that we're pursuing. Our goal is to not only share our knowledge and insights with other trial lawyers, but also to inform and educate the general public. These are they can be very complicated cases and require a unique amount of experience and knowledge, which is why we came together. the three of us have known each other for quite some time, and we were retained in Washington, involving a case in a rural county called Lewis County, and we put our heads together, and we were able to file that case in Las Vegas because the elderly truck driver, he was in his late 70s, was driving on a Nevada commercial driver's license. And we had a great deal of success with that case. And that's why we thought, one, we really like working together. Two, trucking accidents are complex, and we can put our heads together and help people obtain the justice and success that they deserve. So, Matt or Lincoln, I don't know if you want to add anything to, why you were compelled to join up with the three of us. But, Lincoln or Matt, share what your thoughts are.
I would just say Matt's office and my office have had a relationship that's gone back for probably over a decade, all the way back to a big mass tort product liability case in Las Vegas that stemmed from a hepatitis outbreak at an endoscopy clinic. And Matt contacted our office, and we joined up with him, and we tried a number of those cases in Las Vegas and got ultimately very good verdicts and a good settlement out of that. And our offices worked very well together, and Matt and I particularly individually worked very well together. And so when Kevin and I got the case in Washington, it was a horrific truck accident. The 78-year-old trucker with documented eye problems was driving down the road on a clear day, straight road. Our clients were stopped waiting to make a left turn into a campground while they were waiting for a Ford F-350 pulling a camper the other direction to come to pass. And this guy didn't see our folks at all and just drove right into the back of them, pushed him into the oncoming traffic. And my guy was driving. His wife was in the back seat, and their best friend's teenage son was a passenger in the front passenger seat, and that was Kevin's client. And killed Kevin's client, killed my client's wife, and my client, the driver, was just horrifically injured but survived. And so as Kevin and I looked at that case, some strange things started to kind of appear. And the reason we were able to see that was because the defense was anxious to see the surviving client's medical records, and we worked out a deal with them that if they would give us the driver's file, we would give them my client's medical records. And in that driver's file, we found some nuggets. We found that the driver as Kevin is probably most familiar, under the federal motor carrier regulations, a commercial truck driver can only be licensed in the state of his residence. And this guy was licensed in Las Vegas. And it looked to us like maybe the reason he was licensed in, not Las Vegas, but in Nevada, was that he couldn't pass his physical here in Washington. And so we suspected that he was doctor shopping and changed his residence to get a better doctor so he could get certified to get his license. And that just started us digging. And then we ultimately came up with the theory that, well, if he's a Nevada resident, we can sue him in Nevada. And we had known that Nevada juries are much more favorable to plaintiffs than a rural southeastern or southwestern Washington jury might be. So that led us to bring Matt in and onto the team. And we ultimately did file the case in Nevada and were able to keep it there despite the defense really fighting us hard on that. I think, Matt, we went to the Nevada Supreme Court twice on writs on that?
2 writs, yep. 2 writs. Fought jurisdiction for a couple of years, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was,
and for good reason. I mean, what Lincoln, popped out in terms of getting the files is a lot of lawyers don't know that there's a employment file and a driver's qualification file. And the driver's qualification file is littered with federal documents that require that they're signed under penalty of perjury. And what he signed under penalty of perjury was that he was a resident of Nevada. So, it was just great work.
You guys remember, as soon as we sued him in Nevada, he said, well, I'm not really a resident.
Yeah, that's right. Of course, to get a Nevada driver's license, you have to swear that you're a resident of the state.
I didn't mean it when I signed it under penalty of perjury. And Matt, you've been in, Lincoln and the Friedman Rubin firm have had a great deal of success in Nevada. You recently had a great verdict for $200 million. And that's not shall I say, a typo or a misstatement. What's your sense of Nevada juries? And we don't need to talk a lot about that because we should talk a little bit about our experience in these areas. But you encouraged us to file in Nevada and share why. Obviously there's logically some reason, but
Well, I think one of the reasons why we have a good business model is that each of us has a level of creativity. I'm always a big person on litigating with a team because everybody brings different strengths to the process. They check all of our respective egos, and it's just better for the client. And so what you guys were faced with in Washington was a more conservative rural jurisdiction that you'd likely have to try the case in. And it happened that the driver was a resident, at least stated on his driver's license, that he was a resident of Clark County, which is Las Vegas. And Las Vegas has the benefit of being a very diverse jury. And people don't think of Las Vegas as being a racially diverse community, but it is very much so. A lot of immigrants come to Las Vegas. It's a big union town. And of course, money may be perceived differently because you're so immersed into the Las Vegas type culture, where if you see in the news somebody hit a $10 million slot, that's not it's a fairly routine occurrence. So those things all together, and the quality of the judiciary is pretty good there. So all of those things together, Wayne, and it's much better to be in Las Vegas for the client to maximize compensation.
Which occurred in this case. We were able to obtain a settlement multiple times higher than we would have obtained in Lewis County for this family. And some people might think, well, geez, that's, kind of gaming the system. And the fact is, it isn't. It's taking care of the people that come to us to be taken care of. I think it's in a way.
If we were gaming the system, we wouldn't have kept the case in Nevada.
Exactly.
After 2 trips to the Supreme Court. The trickiest aspect of that case was not getting jurisdiction over the driver. It was getting and keeping jurisdiction over his employer. And that was pushing the envelope a little bit on jurisdictional principles, but we were able to successfully argue that the only authority under which his employer was operating that truck was authority that had been granted through the state of Nevada. So in essence, they were subject to Nevada jurisdiction. And luckily for us, the Nevada Supreme Court agreed with us.
And I'll say this, and then let's talk a little bit about our experience of what makes trucking cases different. But you guys will both recall that the defense attorney stood up in front of the judge and says, well, what the heck does Nevada have to do with this? Or why do they have an interest? And she paused and looked out at the lawyer and said, you mean the fact that they issued a commercial driver's license to a 78-year-old person? And I think that was kind of pivotal in terms of her thinking and why we were able to keep it in Nevada. But Matt or Lincoln, I'm board certified. I'm proud of the fact that I'm board certified. If people are going to see all those books behind me, most of them deal with trucking accidents, the trucking industry. But share what you think makes truck accidents different, and why having an experienced truck accident lawyer is important for people that are involved in a truck accident.
So Kevin, before we get there, could you explain to everyone what you were board certified in? I don't think that came out.
No, I appreciate it. That's why we're a team. You catch me on these things. So board certification is a process that occurs through the National Board of Trial Advocacy. And it requires that you have had a certain number of cases, experiences, presentations, and writings in the area of specifically and only truck accidents. And you've got to fill out an application that qualifies you to take an all-day test. And I'm not minimizing it when I say you have to be handling these cases for 10 to 15 years, maybe more, in order to get the requisite points to be able to sit for a test. And I'll share, the test was a pain in the ass. And I hope that's okay to say in a podcast, but it's an all-day test at your desk, where you're having to, in the morning, have 4 hours of multiple choice questions, and then in the afternoon, 4 hours of written questions. And it's complex, and it involves truck accidents, trucking industry, and heavily on the federal motor carriers safety regulations, which the word federal obviously implies that it's a federal mandate, but every state has adopted a portion of those regulations to monitor what's called intra-state action or intrastate commerce, meaning the trucks stay within the boundaries of that state. For example, Washington, we have codes that adopt those regulations. Interstate means travel from Washington, Oregon, Washington to California, or across borders. It's a little more complicated than that because you can get interstate from a variety of means. But I qualified after many years of practice, and then I sat for this test, and I'm very proud to say that I passed the test, especially since it was the first test I'd taken in about 20 years. And there are about 60 lawyers across the country, that's it, that are certified through the National Board of Trial Advocacy. So it's something I'm very proud of, and something that I worked very hard to obtain over the course of my career. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. There's more to it, but that's kind of the basics and how I became board certified. But I will just add, the fact that Matt and Lincoln are not board certified takes nothing away from the great deal of experience and knowledge that they have in handling truck accidents. And Lincoln, for you, what do you think makes truck accidents different?
Well, I mean, we could probably go on at length about that, but really, if you boil it down, right, everybody knows that trucks are multiple times larger than passenger vehicles. I mean, they're approved under the regulations to carry up to 80,000 pounds or to weigh up to 80,000 pounds and sometimes more with special, permits. And your average passenger car is anywhere 4,000 to 5,000 pounds. So you put those two together and the recipe results in significant injuries the majority of the time. That said, when you've got significant injuries, then you look at, well, how do you get compensated? Under federal law, motor carriers don't actually have to carry much liability insurance at all. And so that typically leaves a plaintiff's attorney in a situation where they've got to look for other sources of compensation for their client. That's where putting this team together with kind of our different skill sets helps, right? So you've got issues where you can look to product liability. Oftentimes you have insurance coverage issues. You can have broker liability issues. You can have shipper liability issues. You can have sometimes issues, as you know, Kevin, like with FedEx. Somebody will be shipping a product with a big FedEx sign on the side of their, or UPS on the side of their vehicle, but they're not actually owned and operated by FedEx or UPS. And there are some times that you can hold them liable if they've exercised enough control over what their independent contractor's doing. But you basically need, someone or a team of folks, which is why we put a team together, who is skilled and has expertise in all of those different areas. Insurance coverage, let's start with like the basic law of liability, right? You've got an accident, who's at fault, how do you prove it, that kind of thing. And then you go to how do we get full compensation for our client, who more often than not has been catastrophically injured. And when you get to that point, then you've got insurance coverage issues. You've got, how do you get secondary liability, not just the driver, but somebody else that has more insurance than that driver, the employer, a manufacturer of the truck that may not have put the latest safety system on there, or had, defective brakes or various things like that. Underguard protection, side guard protection, blind spot warnings, systems, all those kind of things. And that's where, Matt's got insurance coverage and bad faith experience, substantial experience in that regard. I've got a fair bit of experience in insurance coverage and bad faith. That's where both Matt and I have done complex products liability cases. Matt, I think your recent big verdict was a broker case, wasn't it?
Well, the $200 million verdict was a health insurance bad faith.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you had a
before that case,
I was involved in a trucking broker case that had a very positive settlement that resulted in a Ninth Circuit opinion. It was the first in the country interpreting a preemption provision that's kind of complicated, but basically shipper, like a Costco, for example, might hire a broker to transport goods. The broker then selects the driver. And so if that driver is not competent and there's evidence that the driver is not competent, what is the broker's responsibility? That's basically kind of the issue. And there's a preemption provision that the brokers say, we have no responsibility. Any negligence claim that you would have against us is preempted because it's a regulation on trucking, right? A regulation on services. And that's been, back to the deregulation of trucking many years ago. So the issue in our case was the negligent retention of a driver preempted by federal law. And we ended up convincing the Ninth Circuit that the negligence claims fell into an exception to the preemption rule. So we probably should do another podcast on it because it's kind of complicated.
Well, and let me just say this: you're kind of being humble. It's kind of complicated. I mean, that's kind of what the message that we want to share with people is that these cases are complicated, and we're not just saying that so that we can, pat ourselves on the back or suggest that we're, superior in knowledge. But in many ways, we are when it comes to these cases. People don't know that when there's a truck accident, the motor carriers have emergency response teams that go to the scene, and they're taking measurements, interviewing witnesses, inspecting vehicles, while the victim is either on their way to a trauma center to try to save their life or care for the injuries that they've had, or the family is beginning the notice and grieving process that a loved one's been killed. So right from the beginning, people that are involved in truck accidents are behind the motor carriers. And the one thing that we have is we have experts that we have worked with across the country. We have investigators that we've worked with across the country, and we're able to get those folks involved and engaged as soon as we're retained. And that, I think, separates us quite a bit from many other lawyers. And one of the things I'll add is we're here for as we've said before, not only the victims, but other lawyers that want to reach out to us and pick our brain, so to speak, or bounce ideas off of us. But it's those sort of things. I mean, I could pull it, but the federal motor carriers regulations are about that thick, and they're very complex, and they apply to different areas of responsibility and duty. I mean, look, if a semi-truck driver runs a red light and wipes out another car, that's not initially that complicated in terms of the facts of the accident. But there are so many different types of accidents that occur that people don't think in terms of liability because they don't quite understand the duties of motor carriers and commercial truck drivers. So that's just something in terms of experience. And Matt, what would you add to that? And maybe you could add something, Lincoln, and then we can close out our first but exciting podcast, the Truck Crash Litigators. And so Matt, what would you add to that?
I'd say another thing to just back up. I mean, I'm a believer that when a client comes into your door and you sign up the client, you got to be prepared to go to trial. And I think that one of the reasons in the past that Friedman and Rubin and I have gotten along so well together is we have a similar viewpoint of how is it that you're going to get the case to trial. And you have the same viewpoint, Kevin. And in doing that, you're figuring out how to tell the most compelling story to bring everyone that's potentially responsible into the story and figuring out from the beginning to the end. So, like to your example of how, a rear ender, which is really what the Denniston case was. How do you explain that story by working backwards to show that it was more than just a rear ender? It was a systematic failing of a truck company, or in this case, they were moving produce. But that's an example of, and I think that's what we bring to the table in these complex issues is we have the experience of telling a compelling story and figuring out how jurors would be compelled by our story.
Well, and when an insurance company or defense counsel looks at Friedman Rubin, Matt Sharp, Kevin Coluccio, they know they've got, legitimate opposition, and they set their reserves and expectations accordingly. They know that we'll take the case to trial, and they know we can get good results.
I don't say that other lawyers don't have this, but I'll tell you the one thing that draws me close to Matt and Lincoln is the compassion and empathy that we have for the people that come to us. Let's not kid ourselves. And this is tough for me, and I know it's tough for Matt and Lincoln because they have kids, they have wives, they have relatives, parents. When people come to us, it's almost always at one of the worst times in their lives. They're either in a trauma center just trying to put their life back together, or they're at a coroner's office. And I'm not overstating that, trying to figure out why their loved one was killed. And we're lawyers, we're smart lawyers, we're experienced lawyers, but we're also very compassionate towards our clients and want to make sure that they know that for us, it's more than just a case. And that's what I feel is one of the most important things that we do, besides the quality of the work that we put into these cases. Matt and Lincoln, I don't want to go on. I think we can wrap this initial podcast of the Truck Crash Litigators Podcast, number 1, up. If you guys want to add something, and people, please reach out to us if you have any questions or you want to bounce some thoughts off us, or we can help in any way. And that goes to other lawyers, and also families and those involved in truck accidents. So Matt or Lincoln, anything you want to add?
No, thanks for listening.
And nothing to add.
All right. That's a new one when lawyers don't have more to say. So next time
you were so well. You summed it up so well. There was nothing else to add, Kevin.
Yeah, exactly. Well, hey, everybody, take care. Be safe out there. And we'll see you next time.
That concludes another episode of the Truck Crash Litigators Podcast, hosted by the Trucking Injury Law Group and part of the Lawyer Minds ecosystem. Thank you for listening, and we truly hope it was worth your time. Please consider subscribing to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. Explore the other content that Lawyer Minds has to offer and engage with us on social media. Your feedback and ideas are always welcomed. That concludes another episode of the Truck Crash Litigators Podcast.